You didn't choose to ask. You were taught. Long before you understood what your voice was for, you learned what happened when you used it wrong. A sharp tone, a withdrawn smile, the unbearable silence of someone you needed shutting down the part of you that spoke too honestly, too boldly, too soon. So you adapted. You toned yourself down. You became strategic. You watched for cues, waited for signs, scanned the faces of others for signs of approval before you dared to act. And somewhere along the way, that adaptation became who you thought you were. Someone careful, someone patient, someone who thinks things through. But underneath all of that caution is something else entirely. A split. A fracture between your instinct and your action. A delay where your life should be. That delay is not strategy. It is fear in disguise. Not the kind of fear that screams. The kind that whispers. Don't say that. Don't do it yet. What if it's wrong? It's the fear of being too much. Too soon. Too real. And every time you listen to it, a part of you gets smaller. Every time you wait for the perfect moment, the safe moment, the moment someone finally gives you the green light, you hand your life over to people who were never meant to decide it. You tell yourself you're being responsible, that you're just not ready, that you're waiting for clarity, but deep down you know what you're really doing. You're asking, not out loud, but in your body, in your posture, in the way your voice hesitates just before the truth leaves your lips, in the way you defer, delay, pull back, just in case. You don't want to be a burden. You don't want to be wrong. You don't want to take up space no one invited you to occupy. But who gave you the idea that you need to be invited into your own life? This is the chain. It doesn't look like violence. It looks like politeness, like waiting, like self-control. But what it really is disappearance. The slow erosion of selfhood through a lifetime of asking, is this okay? Am I allowed? Is it too soon? The tragedy is you've asked these questions so many times you don't even realize you're still asking. It's automatic. And that's the point. A chain doesn't need to be visible to be real. It just needs to be effective. But here's the truth no one told you. The life you're waiting for permission to live, no one else can authorize it. Not because they won't, but because they can't. They don't know what's trying to come alive in you. They don't feel the urgency that wakes you up at night. They don't carry the vision, the need, the rage, the tenderness. You do. And if you keep asking, you'll never get to see what's on the other side of that silence. You're not stuck because you don't know what to do. You're stuck because you're waiting to be allowed, and you don't need to be allowed. You need to move. This isn't just a personality trait. It's a wound. A trained reflex that took root before you even had language. Because long before you learned to speak your truth, you learned to survive. You learned that your instincts could make people uncomfortable, that your curiosity could provoke punishment, that your boldness could cost you love. And so you did what all children do. You adjusted. You became smaller than your full self in exchange for safety. And it worked. You were praised for being good, for being quiet, for being easy. But the problem is that praise was never for who you were. It was for who you became in order to be accepted. And now, years later, that same strategy is still running in the background, convincing you that your freedom must be earned, that you have to prove something before you can claim anything, that some unseen authority still needs to stamp your soul with a yes before you're allowed to live fully. But no one tells you how much this robs you. Not just of confidence, but of your sense of reality. Because when you spend your life checking in with others before you act, you start to lose touch with your own instincts. You begin to second-guess the signals your body sends. You delay your intuition until it goes quiet. You rehearse yourself so often that the performance starts to feel like the truth. And eventually, you forget what you even wanted in the first place, only that you're still waiting for someone to say it's okay. And that's the cruelest part of the whole thing. The longer you wait for permission, the more you disconnect from the part of you that could have led the way. And because you've internalized the pattern so deeply, you don't even realize you're asking anymore. You just feel stuck, unmotivated, blocked. But those aren't the real problems. They're symptoms. Symptoms of a deeper lie, that you have to earn your freedom, that you have to become ready before you take the first step. But readiness is a trap. It keeps you frozen in self-improvement loops. always preparing but never moving. It keeps you consuming knowledge instead of creating change. It keeps you spiritually paralyzed, because as long as you're asking, you don't have to risk anything real. But you do. Because this isn't just a mindset issue, it's a life issue. Every day you wait is a day lost, a day you could have spoken the thing, written the truth, left the situation, started the path. But you didn't, because deep down, some part of you still hoped someone would show up, look you in the eye, and say, "You're allowed now," and they never did. Maybe no one ever will, and maybe that's the point. Because the moment you stop asking is the moment your life begins. You've been told that waiting is wisdom, that restraint is maturity, that caution is strength. But what if that's the lie that keeps you small? What if the very virtues you've been praised for, your politeness, your humility, your discipline, were never about your growth but about your containment? This is where it gets harder to see. Because the chain you carry doesn't just come from your past, it's reinforced by the world you live in now, a world that does not benefit from you being free. Systems thrive on your hesitation. Institutions are built on your obedience. Economies are fueled by your self-doubt. The more you hesitate, the more you consume. The more you second-guess, the more you stay dependent. The more you wait to be chosen, the less likely you are to realize you were never meant to wait in the first place. Nietzsche called this the morality of the herd, a set of values designed not to awaken you, but to pacify you. You're taught to equate safety with sameness. You're taught to mistrust your inner fire. You're taught to seek validation before truth, approval before authenticity. And it works. The world doesn't have to silence you. You'll do it yourself, gently, elegantly, with a smile. You'll censor your instincts. You'll dress your truth in disclaimers. You'll become so skilled at anticipating rejection that you stop offering anything real. And then you'll wonder why nothing feels alive. Jung approached it differently, but arrived at the same place. He believed the true self isn't born, it's built through a process of descent. Individuation, he called it. The journey of reclaiming the parts of you that were lost, rejected, or buried beneath the performance. But that journey requires confrontation. It demands that you see the mask and choose to take it off. It asks you to risk being misunderstood, to step outside the roles you've mastered, to stop asking who you're supposed to be and start asking who you already are. And that question, the real one, terrifies people, because it has no external answer. No formula, no guaranteed applause. It's a question you have to walk into alone. And most don't. Most stay in the performance, not because they're weak, but because it's rewarded. It pays to wait. It pays to obey. It pays to edit your truth into something more marketable. But what it costs you is everything. Because the self that performs is never satisfied. It's always scanning the room, watching for signs that it did the right thing. It's always slightly out of sync with itself. It's always asking, and it will never be free, no matter how successful, how admired, how loved, because it is not real. There is no success that can soothe the ache of self-abandonment, and there is no recognition that will ever replace the moment you finally stop asking and start returning to the one thing that's always been waiting for you, your own voice. There is nothing accidental about your hesitation. It's not just personal, it's cultural, social, structural. You weren't born asking for permission, you were taught to, conditioned into it by a world that depends on your doubt. From the moment you enter a classroom, you're taught to raise your hand before speaking, ask before moving, wait before acting. Initiative is praised, but only within limits. Creativity is encouraged, but only if it fits inside the system. You're rewarded not for thinking freely, but for thinking correctly. And so the need for permission becomes invisible, normalized, until it stops feeling like a chain and starts feeling like good behavior. But that obedience doesn't end when you leave school. It just changes form. It follows you into work, into relationships, into your sense of self. You defer to authority. You wait for a promotion to feel valuable. You look for external metrics to tell you you're succeeding. You shrink your instincts to fit someone else's expectations. You silence yourself in meetings, not because you have nothing to say, but because you've been trained to doubt the way you say it. You ask your partner if it's okay to want more. You ask your audience if your truth is palatable enough to post. And then you wonder why you feel disconnected from your life, like you're playing a part in someone else's script. It goes deeper. The culture of productivity thrives on your self-abandonment. A person who doubts themselves will always work harder to prove their worth. A person who needs to be chosen will compete harder for attention. A person who's been trained to ask will rarely demand. So the world sells you empowerment while quietly benefiting from your powerlessness. It tells you to speak your truth, but punishes you when you do. It tells you to be authentic, but only if that authenticity is easy to digest. It tells you to follow your dreams, then hands you a roadmap of compromises and approvals and permissions that slowly strangle the thing you were trying to protect. And it's not just systems, it's people. Families do this, relationships do this, communities do this, because a person who stops asking, who owns their voice without apology, disrupts the dynamic. They stop playing by the old emotional contracts. They stop needing to be rescued, managed, or praised. And when you stop asking, people who relied on your permission-seeking will feel it as a loss. They will call it selfish. They will call it disloyal. They will call it a phase. But what it really is freedom. And freedom often looks like rebellion to those who benefit from your silence. That's the moment where most people turn back, when the pressure to conform begins to sound like love. When the voices of others start to resemble your own again, when the world offers you comfort in exchange for your return to the performance. But if you give in, if you go quiet again, it won't be peace you find. It will be numbness. A life that looks functional from the outside but is hollow at the core. You were not made to perform forever. You were not born to obey your way into wholeness. The world may never hand you permission, but that doesn't mean you need it. This need to ask, to wait, to shrink before you act, it doesn't just live in your thoughts. It lives in your body, your nervous system, your muscles, your breath. It's not just a mindset you learned, it's a rhythm you embodied. Because when you were small and powerless, your survival depended on your ability to please the people who held your safety in their hands. If they were unpredictable, you became careful. If they were distant, you became impressive. If they were easily disappointed, you became responsible. Slowly, quietly, your body learned what kept you close to love and what put you at risk of losing it. And so every time you got small and were rewarded, a loop was reinforced. Every time you expressed yourself and were punished, a circuit was closed. Your instincts didn't disappear. They were just filed under danger. And now, years later, that loop is still running. That caution still lives in your breath, in your throat when you hesitate before speaking, in your chest when you second-guess an idea, in the tension that rises before you say something that might disappoint someone. You may think you're just overthinking, but your body is scanning for danger, not because danger is present, but because it was once tied to expression. And so your nervous system stalls. It freezes. It makes you wait. It makes you feel like every move you make needs to be reviewed, justified, softened. This is what Jung meant when he said the shadow isn't just darkness, it's potential that's been repressed. Your power didn't vanish. It was just buried under layers of learned caution. Your voice didn't go away. It's just tangled in a nervous system that associates freedom with abandonment, power with punishment, authenticity with exposure. And the only way to untangle that is not to think your way out of it, but to slowly begin creating a new relationship with your body. One that doesn't ask if it's allowed to speak, move, act, or want. That begins with the smallest moments. The breath you take before saying what you actually mean. The way you sit without collapsing into apology. The silence you no longer rush to fill just to make others comfortable. These aren't trivial. They are acts of nervous system reprogramming. They are your biology learning that it is safe to be you, without asking first. And this is why freedom isn't just an idea. It's an experience. It lives in the way you walk into a room without permission, the way you create without waiting for applause, the way you move as if you already belong, because you do. You always did. But your body forgot. And now you get to help it remember. This is the real rebellion, not just thinking differently, but being differently. And that kind of transformation doesn't happen in a moment of inspiration. It happens in the quiet, uncomfortable repetition of choosing yourself before anyone else does. There always comes a moment, quietly or violently, when the self that waits starts to break. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps in as exhaustion, as burnout that no amount of rest can touch, as a dull ache you can't explain, a sudden resistance to the life you built so carefully. You begin to dread the things you used to strive for. You meet your own voice with suspicion. You find yourself surrounded by a life that looks right from the outside and feels dead on the inside. And still you hesitate to move, because permission is the only language you've ever spoken. But beneath that hesitation, something is rising, a quiet rebellion, not loud, not angry, just undeniable. It's the part of you that can no longer tolerate being half alive. The part of you that knows, if you wait any longer, something essential will calcify. And that's when the collapse begins. Not of your life, but of the mask. The persona you built to survive the world starts to crumble. The performer can't keep up the act. The overachiever feels empty. The people-pleaser feels resentful. The thoughtful, careful self begins to feel like a cage. This is the death of the asking self. And it's terrifying, because you don't yet know what will replace it. You only know you can't go on like this. And so you hover in the liminal space between the life you know how to live and the one you haven't yet dared to claim. You want to move, but your nervous system is screaming. You want to speak, but your voice is shaking. You want to leave, begin, say no, say yes, but all you've ever done is wait for someone to say it's okay. And that voice, the one that's rising, doesn't ask. It doesn't need to. It doesn't justify or defend. It just speaks. And that's what makes it dangerous to the old world, because it doesn't belong to the systems that trained you. It belongs to you. This is the threshold, the moment where the false self starts to fall apart, not because you failed, but because you're finally ready to live. But if you don't recognize this for what it is, a liberation disguised as breakdown, you'll mistake it for collapse. You'll panic. You'll go back. You'll beg for another version of safety, and the performance will resume. The life will look stable again, but something inside you will begin to rot, because once you glimpse your freedom, even for a second, you can't unsee it. You can't unfeel what it's like to not need permission, and if you don't answer that call, the ache will never leave you. It will only grow quieter, deeper, colder. This is the danger of waiting too long. You don't just lose time, you lose yourself. You don't shatter the chain with one decisive blow. You break it slowly, steadily, deliberately, one link at a time. You break it when you speak even though your voice shakes, when you say no without explaining, when you move towards something real before anyone says it's the right time. You break it when you catch yourself asking, silently, in your body, in your hesitation, and you choose to act anyway. This is how it begins, not with clarity, not with confidence, but with movement. Permission doesn't dissolve through thinking. It dissolves through doing, through the first uncomfortable step into the unknown, through the breath you take before telling the truth, through the message you send, the boundary you draw, the risk you stop negotiating. That's the rewiring. Not a single transformation, but hundreds of micro movements where you remember that you don't need to wait. And still, your nervous system will resist. Your body will remember the cost, the shame, the looks, the withdrawal. It will contract. It will beg for safety. And in those moments, you meet it with something stronger than logic. You meet it with ritual. Not spiritual performance, not grand gestures, just sacred repetition. Lighting a candle before you write, putting your bare feet on the floor before you speak, saying your truth out loud in an empty room so your voice can hear itself again. These aren't theatrics. They're reprogramming. They're acts of devotion to a self that's learning to exist without permission. And you do it again and again. You start creating even when the outcome is uncertain. You stop asking for signs that it's safe. You stop rehearsing and begin revealing. You live as though your life belongs to you. Not because someone said so, but because something inside you decided that waiting is no longer an option. And every time you do this, every time you resist the pull to ask and choose instead to move, a link in the chain dissolves. One day you'll look back and realize the fear is still there, but it's quiet. You still hear the voice that says, "Are you sure?" but it no longer decides for you. You'll feel the impulse to delay, to shrink, to second guess, and you'll move anyway. Not recklessly, but unapologetically, because by then you will have remembered what was buried beneath all the asking. Your voice, your rhythm, your right to take up space before anyone gives it to you. There will be a moment, maybe soon, maybe quietly, when you do something you once thought you needed permission for. You'll speak without softening. You'll move without checking. You'll create without waiting for applause, and something inside you will pause, startled. Not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. Because for the first time in a long time, you didn't ask. You just acted. And in that moment, a link in the chain dissolves. Not loudly, not dramatically, just gone. This is how it ends. Not with a war cry, but with a return, a remembering that you were never meant to earn your freedom. You were only meant to embody it, that your truth was never supposed to be reviewed, that your voice was not created for approval, that your life is not a proposal waiting to be stamped. It's a pulse, a rhythm, a choice that begins again every day you wake up and say, I will not wait, not for permission, not for proof, not for anyone else to say it's time. That's when you know you're free. Not because fear is gone, but because it no longer runs the show. Not because you feel brave, but because you move anyway. Not because anyone told you you're allowed, but because you decided you don't need to be. If you felt this, even once, I want to know. What's one moment when you stopped asking and chose yourself instead? Share it in the comments. Not for validation, but so someone else who's still waiting might feel a little less alone. Your story could be the crack that helps them break their chain. And if you're still hesitating, still looking for a sign, let this be it. Stop asking. You're already allowed. You always were.